Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And while I've been optimistic for some time, I keep forgetting that Labour is actually going to be in charge for another 4 years, and they have already basically shot themselves in the foot over and over again to the point where I don't even think they have any toes left. And I've run into a bit of a problem now in that pretty much every week I am going through what Rachel Reeves is doing, and every week it seems to get worse, to the point where I'm now declaring she is the worst Chancellor we've ever had, and I can say that with plenty of evidence backing that up. But the problem is that I know she's only going to get worse, and another problem with that is that, well, now declaring that she is the worst ever, how am I ever going to title anything else to do with her to really get across just how woeful she is? Because the thing is that this weekend, when it came to economic news, Labour all of a sudden, or Labour simps I should say, all of a sudden came out of the woodwork to say, look how great Chancellor Rachel Reeves is, because the UK economy will outdo Germany, France and Italy, predicts the IMF, and actually upgraded its growth rate. Which, I've said in plenty of videos before, the IMF is the worst institution I think I've ever seen in my life when it comes to economics. All the IMF seems to exist for is to bail out failing economies, and have a go at successful ones. So given it's not having a go at our economy, that tends to tell me that this isn't actually going to be good news. And also, another point to be made is that outdoing Germany, France and Italy is a bit like saying you're winning the Paralympics as someone without a disability. It's not exactly impressive. But just looking at these numbers, it's still frankly embarrassing. The 2025 growth rate for us is 1.6 compared to Japan and the rest of Europe. Yes, that is higher by a fair margin, to be fair. However, when it comes to Canada and the US, who we should really be bothering to actually look toward, as you can see, we're doing not so great. And then obviously next year we actually downgrade our growth rate. Which again, another thing you got to bear in mind is that the inflation target's 2%. So if your growth rate is below 2%, actually in real terms your economy is shrinking. Not only that, but also we still have hundreds of thousands of immigrants coming into the country, so the GDP growing, whereas the population is growing even more, actually reduces your GDP per capita. So you get double whammied. One by inflation, which at the moment is still above target, and secondly by the large amount of immigrants who, again, the wealth is being shared by an ever greater number of people, and the downward pressure they have on wages and things like that, it basically results in, yes, a shrinking economy, which you got to bear in mind as well that the last 2 months of growth were downgraded. And unless some miracle happens, there's no way we're reaching 1.6% growth in 2025. It's just not going to happen. It's total nonsense. And even then the Times points out that this is still pretty pessimistic from the IMF, given it only raised its projected growth in 2025 by 0.1% compared with its October forecast. It signals that actually it's sceptical over the Chancellor's budget. Business confidence slumped to a 2-year low, and hiring fell sharply after Reeves announced £40 billion of tax rises, including a $25 billion increase in employers' national insurance contribution. And it goes on to say that, well, this IMF report appears to have smoothed over some concerns about the rising borrowing costs, and inflation actually fell unexpectedly, apparently, to 2.5% in December, though I'm hearing that effectively, because business confidence fell, that actually has put us in a more stable position because it's reflecting reality more. And so while inflation's going to drop while businesses are in the process of leaving, it's actually probably going to increase after that sometime next year. At least that's the theory anyway, we'll have to see how it goes. But yes, this drop in inflation triggered a one-day fall in gilt yields, which obviously means that borrowing costs for the government go down. So the overheads rise from about $1 billion to, I don't know, $5 billion or something like that, when it should be $10 billion. And I would wager that Rachel Reeves could not tell you why any of this happened. I don't think she could tell you why any of this happened. And yet she's in charge of our entire economy. And the thing is, this was news that came out last Friday. Well, if you look at the news that actually came out on the same day, it's not all rosy. I mean, the Times clarification in this very article made sure that you know that it's not all rosy. You move over to what's actually happening in the real world, though, rather than the IMF's predictions, and it's not great. Because actually it turns out that Labour's tax plan actually triggered an exodus of millionaires in the UK. And in fact, according to the statistics, since the general election, a millionaire has left Britain every 4 to 5 minutes. They call it a dollar millionaire because, that means on paper people with about £900,000 of net worth fled the country, and the reason they use dollar is because it's the world reserve currency. Anyway, the Treasury is facing calls to reverse its crackdown on non-domicile residents as the scale of the exodus becomes clear. So these are millionaires who were effectively foreigners, but living in the country, we get to benefit off their tax, while at the same time they get a tax cut or relief from areas where we'd effectively be double dipping on tax, or they'd have to be double dipped on tax because they'd pay, say, income tax over in their home country, or business tax it might be, and so they get relief over here because they wouldn't be here paying other taxes if they were getting double dipped on that particular tax. It's a relief that actually makes perfect sense, but it became a massive political story when it turned out that Rishi Sunak's wife benefits off it, and so quote-unquote avoided paying, a few $100,000 in tax. Problem is, obviously, though, that when you start attacking this, you lose a whole bunch of millionaires who were paying into the tax system, and now, one every 4 to 5 minutes has decided to up and leave. Tax advisors also report that a growing number of British entrepreneurs are prepared to leave the country after the tax rise announcement in the autumn budget. In total, Britain lost a net 10,800 millionaires to migration last year, a 157% increase on 2023, meaning it lost more wealthy residents than any other country except China. The actual number that moved out is even higher because the net figure also takes into account millionaires who actually arrived here. But yes, the net is the one that is more worth looking at. And I'm not being funny, but I seem to remember the number being 8,000 or 9,000 before the election. Then obviously since then, the number's gone up even further. They're much worse than millionaires expected. The outflow, which is mainly to other European countries such as Italy and Switzerland, as well as the UAE, was especially large among the UK's richest residents. Some 78 centimillionaires and 12 billionaires left the country last year too. And I know what a lot of left-wingers are going to say. Who cares? I don't like millionaires anyway. Look at them. They have no loyalty to Britain and what have you. Well, okay, you can say all that if you really want, but at the end of the day, these are the people that keep your benefits rolling. They keep the NHS running. They are, by and large, the biggest tax revenue that the government could ask for, and they've effectively killed the golden goose and are now trying to pluck feathers while they can. Because I think even the Guardian were trying to suggest, why don't we just say that if you want to leave the UK, you have to pay a tax to do that? Great, you get a one-off bill for all these millionaires to leave, and then you lose your golden eggs. It's not good policy. If millionaires are leaving your country, odds are your country's not very good with its economy. That's why they're also leaving China. And there was a sample of 700 non-doms who were surveyed by the Oxford Economics and found that nearly two-thirds of them actually planned to leave the UK or considered so because of the changes. So that's either people who are saying, yeah, I'm getting a plane soon, or those saying, well, I'm thinking of getting a plane soon. Most said the principal motivation was the introduction of inheritance tax on their worldwide assets, while many other jurisdictions do not levy the tax at all or having more generous relief. So yes, it's the non-dom status change, but mostly it's the fact that the government is now trying to say, you see that $1 million company you have over in America? Yeah, you actually owe us a quarter of that when you die, which is obviously just total nonsense. And if you have, again, it's people saying, these people have no loyalty to Britain. Of course they don't. They're non-doms. They are residents of another country. They're effectively foreigners. The fact they're paying any tax at all is, pretty lucky, so we should take as much advantage of that as possible. But obviously, idiot leftists always forget that, if they came to this country, they can just as easily leave it. And there's also, native millionaires who are leaving the country as well, for tax reasons. They still love the country, I have no doubt about that, but realistically, if their family assets are being attacked by the government, why would they stay there? I don't blame them if the government hates them, that they feel like they should leave. They probably want to stay for a number of reasons, but at the end of the day, if their wealth that they have worked for, and bear in mind over 90% of millionaires are self-made, so it is actually their work, but when their work and the fruits of their work are attacked like that, why wouldn't they do what they can to defend it? So I don't have any problem with anyone leaving for these reasons. I mean, as I say, this is an active act of self-harm. The survey found that each non-dom paid an average of $800,000 of VAT in the last tax year. That's an average, by the way. So if 10,000 of them leave, multiply that by 10,000. That's £8 billion of tax revenue gone. and 890,000 in stamp duty over the previous 5 years. So that's just under £2 billion of tax revenue lost to the government every year. That's quite a number. That's nearly 10 billion. You know, that could fund the NHS for like 2 months. I actually just double checked. That's not 2 months. That's actually half a month of NHS spending. My God, it's just ridiculous, that. But anyway, this also affects the private sector because they also invested an average of £118 million in the UK since arriving and given an average of 5.9 million to good causes, i.e. charity. The Treasury predicts that the Labour plan to end non-dom regime will raise £2.5 billion a year over the next 5 years, but Oxford economics say the plan will in fact cost the Exchequer nearly £1 billion a year because so many non-doms will leave, and that is before the impact of lower VAT recipients and other taxes included, which, as I say, from my back of the cigarette packet calculations is about, 10 billion, just under. And then, of course, employment is all going to slow down. The overall economy is slowing down, despite what the IMF say. The numbers are probably going to catch up with the fact that we are actually probably currently in a recession. And I'm not being funny, but when that officially becomes news, I don't see how Labour are anything but toast. And as I say, this is, I guess, a prediction of mine that Rachel Reeves probably will go by the end of the year, and she will be seen as worse than Liz Truss. Obviously there's a bit of copiing there probably, because Liz Truss, I think, gets unfairly maligned. But there's no doubt about it, since Rachel Reeves has got in, she has been worse than Liz Truss. She just gets away with it because she's Labour, and the cultural elite all support Labour. That's frankly it. Anyway, the leftists were ignoring all this, but the rug truly was pulled under Rachel Reeves' feet yesterday when the news came out that a major high street bank considers quitting Britain over red tape. Fresh blow risks impacting tens of thousands of staff and 14 million customers. Yes, a major retail high street bank saying that they are going to leave the UK should raise alarm bells that the economy is about to hit a almighty crash. It's going to make Liz Truss seem so competent I will demand an apology of absolutely everyone who took the mickey out of her. Santander is reportedly considering leaving Britain over excessive red tape in a blow that risks impacting tens of thousands of staff and some 14 million customers. The Spanish banking giant is considering pulling out of the UK as part of a strategic review of its future, according to the Financial Times. If executives decide to leave, they would seek a buyer for the lender's operations here. Or to put that in other words, that means that if they do sell up and leave, don't worry customers, it will be another bank taking on your business. The extraordinary proposal is said to have been partly triggered by frustrations over UK costly rules introduced in the wake of the financial crisis, leading to lower returns than in other markets. So this is going all the way back to 2008. The bank has also been forced to set aside $295 million to cover potential costs of the car finance scandal after court ruling rattled the financial industry last year. Once again, our courts getting in the way of the free market and once again costing all sorts of private industry billions of pounds. Santander's departure would be an embarrassing defeat for the government and its pitch to corporate Britain of offering greater stability and overhauling the regulation. They've got that right. This comes after Rachel Reeves earlier this week summoned the bosses of Britain's regulators and told them they had to help revive Britain's sluggish economy by tearing down the regulatory barriers that hold back growth, which is just it's such a stupid way to do it. You are going to people who are paid to regulate Britain and are therefore incentivised to regulate Britain and asking them to actually have less power, get less of a budget, effectively cede power that they are just not incentivised to do. What you do instead is say, instead of suggesting to them they reduce their regulation, just get rid of some of the bodies that regulate Britain that we clearly don't need. That would be a better way to do it, but no, Rachel Reeves doesn't have any idea how any of this works, so says, oh, tell you what, I'll ask the experts, they'll do it. And they won't, they'll do the opposite. They'll put something forward that looks like deregulation, and it'll actually be more regulation, because that is what has been happening in the public sector for decades. So Santander executives have for years been irked by lower returns in the UK than other markets like Spain, which have been blamed on higher cost base and so-called ring-fencing rules. After the financial crisis, UK regulators forced large banks to ring-fence or separate their retail banking from other more risky investments and international activities, which, to be honest with you, probably does make sense. The FT reported that one former Santander executive said it had always been a possibility that executive chair Anna Botin would sell the ring-fence bank as a result. Insiders said the bank's executives want a focus more on growth regions such as the US after share prices have fallen by just a third in over a decade. The group would step away from retail and commercial banking in the UK under the plans while retaining some corporate investment activities. They want to take risks, is what we are being told here. And effectively what the UK government is saying is, no, you can't take any risks when it comes to retail and commercial, because God, we don't want another 2008. Oh, by the way though, we'll bail you out if that happens anyway. But again, retail banking has kind of turned into one of these quasi-governmental sectors where effectively there's so much government regulation and red tape that it's hardly actually working as a private corporation at all. And this is why Santander are getting annoyed. They can see in other countries, because they're a multinational bank, where actually the retail and commercial sector of their businesses can succeed, and it may be risky, but in the UK they probably want to do that too, but the UK just keeps saying no, because as I say, we just have a mental amount of regulators, and the whole point is that the process is supposed to get things working, but when the process ends up with £100 million being, was it 100 billion or 100 million? I think it was 100 million spent on a bat tunnel for HS2, and ends with every new house having to have a heat pump and windows can't be less than a metre from the floor. It's usually around that time that people really have to start thinking, maybe we should actually just get rid of regulations. But unfortunately the country's so gaslighted by Labour and the left wing saying that actually we are under-regulated that people seem to actually want more regulation. The right let the left gaslight way too much, gave them way too much good faith, when reasonably, as it turns out, we should probably have just laughed them out of all debates because they just got so much wrong. We have literally had a left-wing country effectively since 1945, especially under Attlee, and there's barely been a government that was more right-wing than Attlee up until Margaret Thatcher. And then that was overturned by Blair and Brown. There's a Thatcher 2.0 coming, and the more time goes on, the more I genuinely think it's going to be Nigel Farage, and it's going to be glorious. Anyway, what's Reeves' answer to all this? Oh, well, she visited China and managed to get a £600 million boost to the UK from China. I can't tell you how little that actually is. A 3-day trip to China to come back with £600 million to the UK economy is nothing. Bear in mind the UK economy is about £2 trillion large at the moment. That is absolutely nothing when it comes to investment from another country. Absolutely nothing. And it's seen by Reeves and Labour as a great success. It's not. It's embarrassing. 600 million is effectively a rounding error for China's foreign investment. And effectively they seem to be doing that as a show of goodwill to Labour, who, because they don't understand anything about economics, China know that they can get away with this and say, oh, they'll love that, look at all the headlines they can get. When, in reality, for anyone who understands just how much money should be in foreign investments from China, it's insulting more than anything, and Labour don't even realise that, especially Rachel Reeves doesn't realise that. Anyway, because it showed her good headlines going abroad to effectively beg for money, Rachel Reeves then jets off in pursuit of Davos gold. The Chancellor has a spring in her step after a surprise fall in inflation as she heads to Davos to woo the cash-rich Middle East at the World Economic Forum. Just makes it... I know the headline's making it sound like this is good news, but effectively it just sounds like she's going cap in hand to other countries. Please invest in us, we could really do it. When in reality, you shouldn't have to go around doing that. You should just have an attractive market, which we don't have. Hence, the government have to go around basically begging people to invest. It's embarrassing. So the Chancellor is seeking private investors for big infrastructure and green energy projects and has been courting cash-rich countries in the Middle East. Amazing. It's nuts, isn't it? Massive part of Labour's plan in the manifesto was to say, oh, for every £3 of investment from the private sector, there'll be £1 of public investment. It was something like that. It may have been the other way around. Doesn't really matter. Point is, they were massively relying on private sector investment. But because they're not getting that, because the market's so unattractive, as I say, basically they have to go to the Middle East to beg for them to invest in our green infrastructure projects, which, by the way, includes carbon capture and storage, which in turn makes absolutely no money. The whole point is that it's a money sink to try and save the planet from carbon dioxide emissions, which to some extent I think isn't the worst idea in the world. But at the end of the day, it's a money sink. It's something that we should be doing once we've actually solved our economic problems. We haven't done that at all. Hence, we have to beg other people to try and invest in that, and they're never going to because there's no return on investment. Reeves, whose competence has come under the spotlight, was criticised for heading to Beijing amid market concerns over stagflation and soaring government borrowing costs. Again, this was put out on Sunday. This is after the IMF was trying to give us a good news story, and already it's taken 2 days, but already the Times was once again saying the market sucks. She will arrive in Switzerland buoyed by a surprise fall in inflation in December, which will pave the way for the Bank of England to cut interest rates in February and upgrade an upgraded growth forecast from the IMF. But they had to start that whole paragraph with bad news, didn't they? It's just embarrassing. So to win over these private investors from the Gulf state and elsewhere, Reeves and Sir Keir Starmer will need to forge close personal relationships with the region's leaders, according to Lord Udny Lister, Boris Johnson's former number 10 chief of staff and envoy to the Gulf. Of course, the health of the economy is a factor, but in this part of the world, relationships and trust are number one, said Udny Lister, a Davos veteran who had maintained extensive ties with the Gulf states and their leaders. During Johnson's premiership, he said the UK had gone all out to attract the Gulf investors, offering them the red carpet treatment. Again, we've had to basically go out and beg for money on the international stage before. This isn't a uniquely Labour thing, but it's getting even more important for Labour because, one, it's part of their promises to get private investment, so obviously people aren't going to willingly invest in Britain, so they have to go out and beg for it. Amazingly, Johnson had to pretty much do the same thing. Economy's never been that good. Johnson was personally heavily invested in the strategy and maintained close relationships with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia and the President of the UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. A unit was also set up in number 10 dedicated to attracting inward investment from the Gulf and similarly wealthy countries. Again, this is all getting it backwards. We should be looking at how we can actually improve the economy to just naturally attract investment like this. Why do you need a whole government department saying, right, how do we get Gulf money? And effectively their answer every time is, tell you what, send the Chancellor over and just beg for money. That's their answer every time. It's embarrassing that we're still doing this. It works to some extent because we have some Gulf investment, but where do they put the money mostly? Where there's massive amounts of return on investment in football clubs and things like that. Hell, you watch ITV Racing, every single time it goes to adverts, you're getting adverts to travel to Dubai for a holiday. Because again, they've put a lot of money into sports because that is a decent return on investment. Why would they put it into the green projects when clearly they only run well on government subsidies? This is the thing. Their return on investment is going to come from the taxpayer. It's not going to come from us actually paying for the energy that we want. It's going to pay for energy that costs... It's going to pay because we are forced to pay for energy that's subsidised to try and keep the bills to a decent level. People don't realise that a large part of their tax bill just goes straight to the same energy. It's just then cut off the tax bill. It's a bit like how trains work in Europe. A big reason that trains are so cheap in Europe is because governments subsidise them. We don't subsidise ours as much, therefore the ticket prices are higher. Whereas if we had an actual market economy, my god, things would be completely different. But we have the vision of the anointed in charge, so who are we to question it? But anyway, you get the point here. Economy's in tatters. There's no way inflation is staying at 2.5%. I have no doubt it is going to rise in the future, and if I get that wrong, then I will literally buy a camera, and you can literally watch me eat my own words. Retail banks want to get out of here. No one wants to invest here, so we have to go out and beg. It's all just embarrassing, and the Chancellor is doing absolutely nothing to actually try and sort this. In fact, when she does try and actually do something decent, it turns out to be a complete catastrophe. UK lawmakers warn Reeves' cost savings drive may fall flat. Now you might be wondering what was her cost-saving drive, because even I forgot about this. So lawmakers have raised doubts over the Chancellor of the Exchequer plan to cut down on wasteful spending, warn that new efficiency unit is understaffed and has little time to achieve its mandate. Oh my god, the government puts something in it doesn't really want, and it understaffs it and has no idea what its actual target is. Colour me shocked. I'm not being funny, but the amount of quangos or quote-unquote independent governmental bodies that we have in the UK that have this exact problem, it's ridiculous. It's probably over half of them. And instead of just saying, right, these pointless quangos, let's just get rid of them, what do they say? Oh, let's make another one to tell us which ones we should get rid of, even though it should be obvious. But then what happens there? Oh, that's completely useless. Are they going to get rid of it? No, they'll keep it forever. This is how the non-British state works. We're literally at a point, by the way, where because of all these incentives and how the British state works, disability benefits are now 20% higher than the UK defence budget. We spend more on disability benefits, giving people money who, by the way, a lot of them aren't even particularly disabled. They can perfectly well live a normal life. You know, there are people who are on PIP that I know who have psoriasis, which is effectively a skin condition where you get common rashes. Here's the NHS's impact of psoriasis. Although psoriasis is just a minor irritation for some people, it can have a significant impact on the quality of life for those more severely affected. For example, some people with psoriasis have low self-esteem because of the effects of the condition on their appearance. It's also quite common to develop tenderness, pain, swelling in the joints and connective tissue. This is known as psoriatic arthritis. In other words, having psoriasis gives you low self-esteem, which can affect your mental health, and in turn that is actually a reasonable reason to get PIP if you basically say having low self-esteem has made me suicidal, unironically. Now if it gives you arthritis, that is a completely different problem, and if it gets to the point where, yeah, you basically can't walk because of the arthritis, then yeah, fair enough. But no, this is where disability has got you to. Now, is the government planning to do anything about this? No. They would rather go ahead and make a completely new Quango where they don't want it to succeed. That is what is happening here. Anyway, let's get back on topic. The new unit's chair, David Goldston, is only contracted for a year and it only has 12 full-time staff as it seeks to save money during the ongoing spending review and will set department budgets. It's therefore difficult to see how this will have a meaningful impact on driving efficiencies in department, the committee said. Reeves said ahead of the multi-year spending review that departments would be asked to find efficiency savings within government spending of 5%. Again, that is a reform policy that they have basically nicked, so it's good to see reform ideas are trying to be implemented. The way I do this actually differently is just to say, instead of getting every department to lose 5%, I don't think that's really sensible. Defence, for instance, I think they should be like 200% bigger with that budget. But then when it, say, comes to the regulators of retail banks, why not just get rid of the whole thing? The review will set departments' budgets for 2026 onwards and is expected to conclude in June. Bloomberg reported that the spending could be squeezed if the recent surge in gilt yields wipes out Reeves' already thin headroom against her fiscal rules. Our committee has concluded that the Office for Value of Money is an understaffed, poorly defined organisation that has been set up with vague remit and no clear plan to measure its effectiveness. The Treasury needs to share far more information about what this small team will actually achieve for the taxpayer, which cannot be done elsewhere. In other words, the department that is supposed to actually save people money is a massive waste of money, and we have absolutely no idea how we can even consider that they have actually done what they are supposed to be set up for. Complete waste of money, complete waste of space, and this is supposed to be one of the government's ways of actually, you know, having a sensible economy, and they've screwed it up. It's not sensible at all. Who would have thunk? As I say before, though, this isn't a Rachel Reeves and Labour specific problem. This has been the Tories' problem as well for the last 14 years. However, the problem is that the Labour government we have now has taken that failing model and is completely expanding it. As I say, all the rhetoric about austerity and going more right-wing, lowering immigration, things like that, you compare that to what we actually got, the rhetoric's just completely counterintuitive to the actual policy put in place. The thing is that Labour are doing the same thing, but because people are so wary of this now thanks to the Tories, there's absolutely no goodwill anymore. There's just too many bad news stories. Basically, no one can see how any of this is going to get better. You know, people's energy bills are going up again this year. And, you know, what's all that down to? Well, the current energy policy we have, they're carrying on with the green, net zero zealotry. There's no improvement that anyone can see apart from mental Labour simps. And you never know, I might go over and look at Labour simps' reasoning behind all of this push to try and make it seem that they're actually a competent government, because I just don't understand what their arguments are going to be. I've done it before and they didn't really make any arguments, amazingly. But you never know, I might give them another go. I mean, Labour have lost Novara Media, and they're really the only news outlet I can find that is actually to the left of the BBC. Politics Joe is just the BBC for 20-year-olds, so I don't particularly count that, but it's a very strange situation we're in, where effectively the left wing are effectively dead, The Greens are mainly getting into power because they've got a weird, almost contract with the Muslim vote. The Lib Dems have a NIMBY contract with an awful lot of the Shire middle class. The Tories basically have all the pensioners. The only real new party and new ideas coming from anywhere is in Reform, and they're making a bit of a strange broad coalition that is mainly of men. This is very much why people make the comparison with Trump, because that is effectively Trump and MAGA's base. And Reform are doing that, but in a much more British way. So I genuinely think the next election is going to be very interesting, and it's going to be weird. Reform jumping from 5 seats to 100 seats would be weird enough, but there are polls coming out recently where they're getting 200 seats. And there is a problem that they may peak too early, but honestly, if Labour and the Tories keep going on as they are, I don't see why they won't win the next one. But again, that might just be very much copium on my part, and, well, let's be absolutely fair as well. It is absolutely possible to win too many seats too quickly, and it becomes a bit of a mess, but we'll have to see how it goes. As I say, there's plenty of reasons to be white-pilled when it comes to the end of the clown decade. It appears things are actually going to get a bit worse than I thought for this year. I thought that Labour wouldn't be this bad, and I thought they'd actually learn from their mistakes quite quickly. But no, it turns out that they are just as ideologically possessed as any other leftist. So, yeah, more fool me, I guess. Anyway, I think that will do it for today. So, in terms of shilling, videos out as and when I can make them. The new Laughing at the Guardian was last Saturday. It was a pretty good and decent and even long one. Next one is going to be on the more than likely 31st of January. I'm going to break my January commitment and fail it by about 4 hours, because there's no way I'm going through another Laughing at the Guardian without drink. When it comes to supporting the channel, subscribe, like, give a comment as well. That's all stuff that helps the algorithm and is completely free. If you think I deserve a bit more than that, membership from £2 a month, and you can also send super chats and super thanks in any comment section or any live stream that I do. Those are very direct ways to help the channel, and it is really, really good to see that support as well. Anyway, as I say, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.